In a time when racism ruled America, one man stepped into the ring and into history. This is the untold story of Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight boxing champion who defied the brutal grip of Jim Crow laws, broke barriers, and paid the ultimate price for his pride. From street fights in Galveston, Texas to the world stage, Jack Johnson's life was a fight for freedom, dignity, and justice. Jack Johnson's story begins in Galveston, Texas, on March 31st, 1878, just 13 years after the end of slavery. Born to Henry and Tiny Johnson, both formerly enslaved, young Jack was one of 9 children growing up in a world where poverty and prejudice walked hand in hand. From an early age, Jack Johnson knew life would be a fight. Working on docks and stables, Johnson began to develop the strength and resolve that would carry him to greatness. As Jack Johnson's mother's voice often rang in his ears, "You are just as good as anyone else." Jack Johnson's first fights were gritty, illegal matches fought behind saloons and warehouses. Boxing was raw and unregulated, but Johnson's skill quickly stood out. In the smoky backrooms and dusty lots of Galveston, Texas, November 1st, 1898, a young Jack Johnson, just 20 years old, stepped into a makeshift ring with a fighter named Charlie Brooks. It was one of Johnson's earliest professional fights, a short and brutal contest that ended in a swift victory for Jack Johnson. But this fight wasn't just about fists, it was a sign of the times. Charlie Brooks, like Johnson, was a black man. In the deeply segregated South, 2 black men fighting each other was one of the few ways they could legally enter the sport. At that time, boxing was as much about racial boundaries as it was about skill. White promoters and white audiences would allow black fighters to fight, as long as they didn't challenge white opponents in the sport. By 1903, Jack Johnson was the best black heavyweight in the world. But there was one title he couldn't touch: the World Heavyweight Championship, held by a white man named Tommy Burns. Because Jim Crow laws, while not explicitly banning black fighters from boxing, created a deeply segregated and racist society that fueled the color line in the sport. These laws enforced racial separation in nearly every aspect of American life and shaped public attitudes that viewed interracial competition, especially in a violent, high-profile arena like boxing, as unacceptable. Promoters, fans, and white champions used these attitudes as justification to deny black boxers like Jack Johnson the chance to fight for titles against white opponents. Jim Crow laws reinforced the unwritten rule that kept black fighters from challenging for top honors. For 5 relentless years, Jack Johnson chased Tommy Burns from city to city, even across borders, determined to prove he deserved a shot at the world heavyweight title. But it wasn't fear of losing in the ring that kept Burns and the boxing world at a distance. It was fear of what a black man winning that title from a white man would mean in a segregated society. Because of this fear, boxing promoters kept the fight at bay, protecting the color line and the illusion of white dominance in the sport. Jack Johnson wasn't just fighting opponents in the ring, he was battling racism outside of it. So what did Jack do? Jack Johnson took his talent overseas, and in 1908, he found a stage that was ready to let him shine: Australia. Unlike the deeply segregated United States, Australia didn't care nearly as much about the color of his skin. What they did care about was a good fight and good money. In Australia, Jack Johnson finally got his chance. On December 26, 1908, he squared off against Canadian champion Tommy Burns in Sydney, Australia. From the opening bell, Jack Johnson dominated. He was taller, stronger, smarter in the ring, and had complete control. He taunted Tommy Burns, beat him easily, and made a show of it. The crowd, mostly white, was shocked. They were watching a black man dismantle the white world champion. By the 14th round, Tommy Burns was taking a brutal beating. The scene was getting ugly, and the local police stepped in and stopped the fight. To make it even more dramatic, the footage of the fight was censored in many places, especially in the US, because officials feared it would stir up racial tension. Regardless, Jack Johnson's journey proved something powerful. When one door closes because of hate, another opens where people are willing to recognize greatness. He had to go halfway around the world to get his shot, but when he didn't just take it. He made history. Help us share their stories via PayPal or Cash App. After Jack Johnson won the world heavyweight title from Tommy Burns in 1908, many white Americans were outraged. Johnson's victory shattered a racial barrier they never wanted broken. Newspapers, politicians, and fans across the country called for a great white hope, a white boxer who could take the title back from Jack Johnson. For 2 years, no one could touch Johnson. Then entered James J. Jeffries, the former undefeated heavyweight champion who had long since retired. Jeffries had no desire to return to the ring, but the pressure was immense. James J. Jeffries was offered a massive payday, over $100,000, millions in today's money, and was told, "You have to do this for the white race." After 6 years of retirement, 1910, the former undefeated world heavyweight champion James Jeffries, the pride of white America, was dragged out of retirement, not just to win a fight, but to restore the honor of the white race. Jeffries began training for his fight with Jack Johnson. Under immense pressure, Jeffries withdrew from the public eye and began training in seclusion. The weight he carried wasn't just physical. It was the burden of being called the Great White Hope. Jeffries wasn't just trying to reclaim a title. He was trying to hold back a rising tide. But Jack Johnson wasn't intimidated. He continued training. He smiled through the hate. And Jack Johnson knew this wasn't just about boxing anymore. This was a stand. Jack Johnson received multiple death threats in the lead-up to the fight. Regardless, on July 4th, 1910, Reno, Nevada, thousands gathered under the blistering sun to witness what was called the fight of the century. On one side, James J. Jeffries. On the other, Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight champion, calm, confident, and determined to prove his dominance. From the opening bell, Johnson controlled the ring. He dodged Jeffries' wild swings with ease, grinning as he countered with sharp, precise blows. Round after round, Johnson's mastery was undeniable. Jeffries, once the great white hope, was fading. By the 15th round, Johnson landed a devastating combination. Jeffries hit the canvas twice. His corner threw in the towel. It wasn't just a fight. It was a reckoning. Jack Johnson's triumph on July 4th, 1910, against James Jeffries was more than a win in the ring. It shattered the myth of white supremacy in front of the world. But that victory came with a heavy price. As news of Johnson's defeat of James Jeffries spread, celebrations broke out in black communities across the country. For a moment, there was joy, cheers, parades, even church bells ringing. But in dozens of cities, homes were torched, dozens were killed, hundreds more were injured. The press reported race riots in places like New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, and Washington, D.C. In some cities, black men were lynched simply for celebrating the win. This wasn't just about a boxing match. Johnson's victory symbolized a threat to the racial order. Jack Johnson's confidence, his defiance, his smile in the face of hatred, it enraged white people who believed he had stepped out of his place. The riots were a grim reminder. Even in victory, black excellence was punished. Jack Johnson refused to live quietly. He dated and married white women, flaunted wealth, and drove luxury cars. That boldness made him a target. In 1913, the government charged him under the Mann Act, a thinly veiled, racially motivated prosecution attempt to punish him for loving who he wanted. Johnson fled the U.S., living and boxing abroad while in exile, but his fame couldn't protect him forever. After spending 7 years in exile overseas, avoiding a prison sentence from his 1913 Mann Act conviction, Jack Johnson surrendered to U.S. authorities at the Mexican border in San Diego, California. He was sent to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary in Kansas, where he served approximately 1 year. Despite his imprisonment, Jack Johnson remained defiant, continuing to symbolize resistance to Jim Crow laws and racial oppression. If this story moved you, help us share more like it. Support our work via PayPal or Cash App. Links are in the description. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to History's Gifted, where we spotlight the bold, the brilliant, and the brave, those who broke barriers and reshaped history. Join us and help share their legacy.